Welcome to Women Who Kick Glass, the podcast that dives into the fearless women who changed history and the fights that are still shaping our world today. From suffragists to civil rights activists, these women refuse to back down, breaking barriers and demanding change. And now, here's your host, an advocate, a storyteller, and a woman who kicks glass herself, Ann Potenza.
You've heard of the Wizard of Oz, right? Flying monkeys, yellow brick road, and a girl in ruby red slippers. But what if I told you that behind the magic and the munchkins was a real-life revolutionary woman? A suffragist who wasn't just fighting for votes, but for a complete shift in how society saw women. Meet Matilda Jocelyn Gage. She was bold, she was brilliant, she was radical. And here's the kicker. She was the mother-in-law of L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz. And she didn't just inspire him to write a great story. She inspired the witches. You see, Matilda believed that throughout history, powerful women were often labeled as witches simply because they refused to bow to authority. And what did he do? He created a world where a so-called wicked witch was just a woman with power, and where a young girl named Dorothy didn't wait for a wizard to save her. She saved herself. So let's follow the yellow brick road back to the real Emerald City, the world of Matilda Jocelyn Gage, a woman who challenged power, rewrote the rules, and left a mark on both history and fiction. Let's go back to 1826 in Cicero, New York. Matilda was born into a home where free thinking was the norm. Her father believed that women were just as capable as men, which was actually very rare in the 1800s. And he taught her law, he taught her medicine at a time when most women were denied a formal education. However, after she graduated her co-ed preparatory school, she was refused entry into the medical school because she was a woman. Her father was very influential on her beliefs because he was an abolitionist too. Their home was on the Underground Railroad, so she grew up as a child meeting anti-slavery speakers like Frederick Douglass, and she herself would hand out anti-slavery pamphlets. So by the time she was married and had children, she had very, very strong beliefs about equality. Matilda started writing in newspapers in the 1850s, and she wrote throughout her whole career. And it was a couple of years later at the Third Women's Rights Convention in Syracuse, New York, that she gave her very first speech on women's rights. And she was only 26 at the time, but she was already a powerhouse and a force to be reckoned with. Listen to what she said, and you can tell for yourself. Self-reliance is one of the first lessons to be taught our daughters. They should be educated with our sons and equally with them taught to look forward to some independent means of support, either to one of the professions or the business best fitted to exercise their talents. Marriage has been looked to as the acme of hope by women. And why? Because all lucrative and honorable means of support have been seized by men, and women have been driven to marriage as a necessity. To what more fertile cause can be attributed the uncongeniality frequently existing between married parties? Women have been instructed in showy accomplishments, while literature has been nearly cast aside as unnecessary. Men have been educated not to expect companionship in their wives. At the proposition of equal education and rights, man starts up and says, if women are admitted as equals, you ruin domestic harmony. If a woman is permitted to think for herself, forsooth, she may disagree in her views with her husband, and family peace be destroyed. She was such a brilliant writer and strategist. Her words really helped fuel the movement, and she really refused to compromise when it came to women's rights. She said, I do not wish to vote as a privilege. I wish to vote as a right. And I demand the same for every woman, every race, and every person under oppression. And let me be clear, this was very dangerous talk in the 19th century, and it made her a target, especially after she wrote her book, Women, Church, and State. the original expose of male collaboration against the female sex. It highlights the connections between the church's core beliefs and the restrictions put on women by church and state, especially in the extremes of the witch trials. So let's talk about the witch trials, because that is very much a part of her legacy. Matilda strongly criticized the witch hunts of women in the 1600s, interpreting them as church-supported means of dominating and intentionally killing women. So she highlights this connection by arguing that one can understand the oppression of women by the church on a deeper level if you substituted the term women for witches. She also asserted that educated women who opposed patriarchy were often viewed as a threat by the church, and these were the ones that were most likely accused of witchcraft. And she makes this point from her book. This is what she says. The witch was in reality the profoundest thinker, the most advanced scientist of those ages. The persecution which for ages waged against witches was in reality an attack upon science at the hands of the church. As knowledge has ever been power, the church feared its use in women's hands and leveled its deadliest blows at her. So Matilda also advocated against ageism, because with these women who were killed during the witch trials, think about it. The older women were the ones that were the most educated in the sciences and were the most accused. And she frequently spoke out against this form of ageism by the church towards women. Wow. So I think of L. Frank Baum listening to his mother-in-law talk about these stories about what women went through being oppressed and the witch trials of the 1600s, and how that inspired him to write a story that we enjoy now as a fictional, entertaining story, but it really is based on what women were viewed like back then. I mean, because you're strong and powerful or intellectual, you're a witch, and then good reason to kill you. So when you think about the wonderful Wizard of Oz, and we think about the witches, and we have the Wicked Witch of the West, which represents societal oppression, and then we have the Good Witch of the North, which represents empowerment, I could see how L. Frank Baum was influenced by his mother-in-law and the stories that she told when she was fighting for women's rights and the place of women in society that she was trying to bring light to. I can see how that is in the characters. To think that this started because L. Frank Baum and his wife, who is Matilda's daughter, and she was also a feminist and a suffragist, and to think that they used to sit around and tell stories, these fantastical, magical stories to their children, and Matilda encouraged her son-in-law that he should write about these amazing stories he was sharing. Talking about mother-in-laws, my mother-in-law is actually related to two of the women who were killed during the Salem witch trials. Her 6 times great-grandmother was Mary Esty, because Esty's her maiden name, and her 6 times great-aunt, Rebecca Town Nurse, who is Mary's sister, was also one of the women who was killed in the witch trials, the Salem witch trials in the 1600s. And as a family, we went back and we actually saw their grave and learned about them. And I think at the time we thought it was more of a land grab in those days, that they were trying to get land from certain people in the community, and maybe that was part of it. But now, after learning this and what Matilda was researching and talking about, what if part of the reason they were killed was because they were smart women? What if they were educated or had some knowledge of science or medicine, and that made them a target? When you think about Matilda Jocelyn Gage, you have to admire how brave she was. I mean, she spoke out against the church in the 19th century. That was not easy. Her book, Women, Church, and State, directly spoke against patriarchy and misogyny within the church. And she highlighted and pointed out she spoke out against sex abuse of children and of women by priests. She spoke out against sex trafficking. She admired the Presbyterian Church because they actually allowed women deacons. And she also highlighted groups like the Native Americans that actually treated women and men the same and equal. So she gave credit where credit was due. Matilda was very passionate about crediting women with the work that they did. She wrote another book called Women as Inventor. And in this book, she credited Catherine Littlefield Greene as the inventor of the cotton gin. Matilda was also one of the suffragists who backed Susan B. Anthony when she was put on trial for voting in one of the elections before women had the right to vote. She also worked with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the first 3 of the 6 volumes of the history of women's suffrage, which I have right there behind me, those 6 volumes. So she wrote the first 3 with those other 2 ladies. I love that she was also one of the women with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and a lot of the other suffragists that did write the Women's Bible. Remember when we brought up the Women's Bible where they went through like over 30 chapters and analyzed it to see what stories in the Bible showed the oppression of women. So she was part of that group of women that wrote that Bible and made those points. And you know what I love about her? She stood up against the government about their treatment of the Native Americans at that time. So she didn't just fight for women's rights. She also fought for the Native American rights. She was such an advocate of the Native American tribes. She frequently wrote about them in the New York Evening Post and in her newspapers. And they actually gave her an honorary membership into the clan. They made her a part of the Wolf Clan of the Iroquois Nation, and they gave her the name Karonianhawi, meaning she who holds the sky. You know, she really did hold the sky. When you think in 1990, a scientist named Margaret Rossiter coined the term the Matilda effect, which referred to when women scientists do not get the credit of something that they invented, and the credit goes to a man in their same field, rather to the women. And because Matilda was always so fervent in getting women the credit for what they did from other inventions and other things that they should have gotten credit for, they use her name Matilda to refer to someone that should get the credit when they may not get it by the public. The Matilda effect. She also supported women's right to divorce and reproductive autonomy when she was president of the Women's Suffrage Association. And believe it or not, at the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty, Matilda even spoke out against the hypocrisy of liberty for all when women did not even have basic liberties. So when we think about Matilda Jocelyn Gage and all the work that she did for women's rights and speaking up for those who were accused wrongfully of witchcraft and ageism, and people who have been oppressed by the church, and Native Americans who have been treated terribly by the federal government, when we think of everything she spoke out against and for, why does that matter to us today? Well, think about these things. Well, for one, she fought against the weaponization of religion. I mean, today we still see how religion is there to control reproductive freedom, marriage equality, gender equality. So we're still fighting that. So her lessons we could still bring into what we're trying to keep pushing through nowadays with religion. She fought for Indigenous sovereignty and rights, and today, Native communities are still fighting for recognition and land rights and protection. Her legacy is a reminder that equality isn't about just one group getting rights. It's about all of us getting rights. And the best way to honor Matilda Jocelyn Gage is to make sure she's never forgotten again. That's it for today's episode of Women Who Kick Glass. If Matilda Jocelyn's story inspired you, please share it, talk about it, start a conversation. And remember, history isn't just in the past. We're shaping it right now. Join me next week when we bring you another powerhouse suffragist, Lucy Stone, a woman who refused to take her husband's last name, gave some of the most electrifying speeches of the suffragist movement, and who refused to back down. So don't miss it. I'm Ann Potenza. Keep kicking glass.
Thanks for listening to Women Who Kick Glass. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more, contact the show. Visit womenwhokickglass.com. Women Who Kick Glass is executive produced by Lou Valentino. Written by Lou Valentino and Ann Potenza. Until next time, keep kicking glass.